Alrighty, hi everyone. I'm Max Kleiner. I'm a rising senior in the business school here at Baylor, and I'll be hosting today's event. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's professional development program event. We're featuring Bruce Bentley today, who is the regional manager of the Austin and San Antonio offices for Marcus and Millichap. Bruce got his JD from the University of Richmond and has diverse leadership and management experiences. He's also well-versed in the intricacies of the tax code, land use planning, environmental regulation, 1031 exchanges, and the art of contract negotiations. And he's joining us today to share his insight on how market disruptions can positively shape your career. Welcome, Bruce.
Max, I appreciate the warm intro there, and hello everybody. So as Max stated today, what I'm hoping to convey to the group is how we go about finding the silver lining, specifically in times of market uncertainty, and how do you grow your career through and during and after market disruption. So really the construct that I want to cover today starts with the why, moves with the how, and then the what. So more specifically, why market disruptions can be great for your career. Two, how do you go about thriving in uncertain times? And then lastly, what should you get out of seizing the opportunity? For context, for everyone listening and watching, Max did a nice lead in. Marcus and Millichap, we are a national full-service brokerage firm that specializes in investment sales. So we sell multifamily shopping centers, hotels, self-storage, similar to the way a residential broker brokers the sale of houses between buyers and sellers. So a lot of what I'm sharing today comes from that framework, and it's what we preach to our team. But my goal for today, knowing that we have a lot of diverse viewers out there, is that you're going to be able to take something away that's going to be applicable to either your current or your future career. So let's start with the why. So why can market disruptions be great for your career? So in any time that there's a market disruption, so most recently, obviously, that was the global pandemic. Everybody in your career, regardless of where you're at, there's essentially two different frames of mind. You can either look at a market disruption as a problem and you can make excuses, or you can view a market disruption as an opportunity, something I'm going to dig into a little bit further. And by looking at it through the lens of opportunity, what you're essentially doing is making the choice that you're going to turn it into a success. Because the second we start to view things as simply a problem and not an opportunity, what we're doing, we're effectively shutting our mind down to the possibility that something can be overcome and achieved. And once that happens, there's no way that it can happen. So one way to look at this, a guy named Ron Clark wrote a great book I highly recommend called Move Your Bus. And it's mainly directed, the target audience or target reader for that is typically somebody that's running a company. And there's effectively, per Ron's thesis in the book, there's 5 different groups of people in every single organization. And so those 5 people are one, so the driver. So those are the people that are managing, steering the organization, mainly the readers of the book. And then there's the runners, okay? So the runners, those are your top performers, handle 90% of everything in the organization, and they're always running at an optimal pace. Then there's the joggers. So your joggers are your good workers, dependable, steady, but not necessarily spectacular. And then as we move into the last 2 tranches, there's what's called the walkers. Those are people that are slow and steady. A lot of times within an organization, it's someone that's not passionate about what they're doing. They're simply working for a paycheck. And then unfortunately, in every organization, there's going to be a subset of people that are the riders on the bus. And so the riders on the bus, those are the ones that you could consider to be, if I'm going to simplify it, the dead weight within an organization. So whether or not you're in a professional setting now, certainly everyone can think of maybe different teams they've been on, working on different projects within within your school. You're going to have different people fall into different sections. And so in each one of those situations, you should apply a litmus test and figure out who it is are you going to be. Are you going to be a driver within the group? Are you going to be a runner? Are you a jogger? Are you a walker? Or are you a rider? And then more specifically, the differences between the two are especially illuminated in times of severe market disruptions. So I'm going to come back to this concept in a little bit, but I wanted to introduce it because the differences between each one of these individuals and where you potentially would find yourself is really accentuated in a market disruption. So now that I've touched the why, let's move to the how. So how do you find the silver lining and how do you thrive in and coming out of a market disruption? So one of my favorite people, I know Max is a fan in talking, is Jocko Willink. Jocko has this very successful podcast, has written multiple books. His kind of seminal piece was Extreme Ownership. I also wrote a great follow-up to that, The Dichotomy of Leadership. Followed that up with another one called Discipline is Freedom. But one of my favorite takeaways from Jocko, who's a former Navy SEAL, is using what's called the good philosophy. So regardless of whatever happens, whatever bad news that he might receive or his team might receive, instead of taking that as a problem, instead he's trained himself to essentially say good. And what he's doing by saying good is recognizing that with any sort of problem, that creates an opportunity for someone to overcome it and get better. So what is it that we do when we adopt that good mentality, to where we see a problem, we see a market disruption, and we view it as an opportunity instead of a problem? Well, in our industry, which again is selling commercial real estate, using 2020 as an example, that was a very challenging time because buyers and sellers stopped doing deals for a long period of time, 4, 5, 6 months almost, where deals were few and far between. So what happened? Our team, we had to make a pivot. We had to make a pivot knowing that there wasn't a lot of transactions and it was really challenging to make market share gains. That instead of making market share gains and being transactional with our clients at a very sensitive time too, where a lot of people had a lot of stress. We were in like lockdowns in a lot of cities, and so we wanted to be true advisors to our clients that they could rely on. So what we focused on instead of market share was capturing client mind share. And by that, I mean being a resource, becoming that go-to authority in the realm that we work in for how they're going to go about navigating the situation. So we have people that own shopping centers where their tenants are asking for renovations. We have rent moratoriums and eviction moratoriums being thrown in place, which dramatically impacts our multifamily agents. There was PDP money going on. There was a million different things going on. And we wanted to position ourselves and our agents as the go-to authority for our clients, knowing that if we add value during that time of need, even if there's no paycheck associated with it, that ultimately would turn into a relationship that we could grow and ultimately monetize, which is how our business works. So just to draw like a stark example or distinction between the different types of mentality, without saying names or location, let's just say I was talking to a competitor in the marketplace that I ran into this couple of months into COVID, and I genuinely asked him, hey, it's a war zone out there. Tough getting deals done. It's choppy. How are things? How are you doing? How's the family doing? And his response startled me, not because it was an insane response, but because it was so dramatically different from some of our top producers. And the response I got from the individual was, look, I have plenty of money. I've had a heck of a run over the last couple of years. There's not any paychecks really to be had probably until the fourth quarter of this year. So what I'm doing, I'm just spending a lot of time fishing. And I thought he was joking, but he was serious. And why I draw that distinction is because literally earlier that week, I had put up on a pedestal one of our top agents who happened to actually be a competitor of this individual within our team. And that was an individual that had brokered in his early 20s back in the Great Recession, and benefited greatly coming out of the recession based on the work he did during the hard times. And that individual was one of our first people, like the second week of the lockdowns, that ramped up activity. And by that, I mean, like we track and as a tool for our agents monitor calls, and we send out, hey, this is how many calls you're making each week, and this is your talk time with clients. It's a useful gauge for our team to look at. And so the individual that I'm talking about, Nick Fluellen, Nick normally on a given week, that say would make 30, 40 calls and have 5 or 6 hours of talk time. It was one Sunday night, I was getting ready for our Monday morning sales meeting where I share a bunch of information with the team, and we always share the call report. And I pulled the call report and the numbers just jumped off the page. Nick had made something like 400 calls in the previous week, like 35, 36 hours of talk time. Like just incredible, mind-blowing numbers. And the reason he was doing that is for what I just talked about. And it was a stark difference from the individual that said they were just spending more time fishing. Because Nick recognized that now was not the time to take time off. Now was not the time to focus on the present moment and the problem at hand, but instead it was to focus on the future opportunity. Understanding that in times of uncertainty, that's when clients need us the most. And by doing that, by becoming obsessed with the habit and the activity of reaching out to clients, of growing mind share, instead of becoming obsessed or focusing on whatever the immediate result is, that's how he positioned himself to take advantage of this given competitor or a lot of other competitors in the marketplace that were asleep at the wheel or had a deer in the headlights moment. So again, making this pivot, it's all about capturing client mind share in disruptive times. And by focusing on that, that's going to lead to massive market share gains later on. Or if you're not in a career where there's massive market share gains, it's the opportunity to differentiate yourself and advance your career. All right, so now that we've talked about the why and the how and the pivot, now let's talk about the what. What can you expect by taking advantage of the silver linings in a disruptive market? So in our industry and perhaps in other industries, we talk about market burst. And what a market burst is typically a market burst occurs right after a major disruption has occurred, because during a major disruption, there's less transactions or goods being sold or services being sold. But that creates a transactional pent-up demand in the marketplace. So on the backside, what you're going to see more goods being sold, more services being sold. In our case, more properties being sold. So to prove my point empirically, what I want to share is our results in 2020 versus 2021, and even look back to 2019 pre-pandemic. So these are our results as a firm. So in 2021, when we certainly called a market burst based on a bunch of pent-up demand from transactions not happening for basically half a year in 2020, we did $84 billion in sales volume. That was a 94% increase from 2020, which might not be surprising because obviously there were a lot of financial stressors going on in 2020. But when we compare that to 2019, which was an extremely healthy time in the economy pre-pandemic, our 2021 results were still nearly 70% better than 2019. So just to think about that for a moment, not only did we grow year over year due to the market burst occurring in 2021 because of the pent-up demand in 2020, our top producers, those that seized the opportunity, they actually ended up dramatically better off because the pandemic occurred than they would have been had it not occurred. And again, that is only for the people and individuals that were taking advantage of the opportunity. So in fact, in 2021, we actually had a lower headcount in terms of producers within our organization, but we were still able to generate higher results and obviously grow our per capita production. So going back to the 5 groups of people from the Move Your Bus book and metaphor I was using. So we have the drivers, the runners, the joggers, the walkers, and the riders. So what do we think happens to each group during severe market disruptions? Well, I'm going to tell you using our own team, knowing that even with our own team, there were individuals that fell into each one of these buckets. So starting with the riders down at the bottom, that's your dead weight, if you will, as well as your walkers, the ones that are slow and steady, just working for a paycheck, not passionate about what they do. Unfortunately, those individuals, those are typically people that saw the impact on our industry, at least, of the pandemic in such a light as a problem rather than an opportunity. Those individuals became what I call a market disruption or a COVID casualty. It flushed them out of the business. They weren't able to grow their business, and they had to find something else to do as a means of supporting themselves. And then we have our joggers. So our joggers, again, is a refresh. Those are your people that are good workers, consistent, steady, but never going above and beyond, never spectacular. If you look at kind of their view of whether it was a problem or an opportunity in the time of market uncertainty, they'd probably be 1 foot on each, somewhere in the middle. So those people were negatively impacted in 2020. They had very poor years. Now in 2021, due to the market burst, they did ride a strong market in 2021. So they're essentially, the joggers are moving up and down with the flows of the market. But now that we're in 2022, which in our industry, the first half of the year has been very strong, but there's some interest rate sensitivity going on. We're technically, I guess, in a recession. Those individuals that didn't take full advantage of the market disruption, they're going to face a real challenging second half of 2022. But now I really want to focus on, hopefully, the takeaway for each person listening to me and viewing this right now. Is that you want to be either a driver or a runner. You want to be the dependable person within your organization. You want to be the individual that has that good mentality, the individual that views a challenge as an opportunity as opposed to a problem. So how did our drivers and our runners finish? So 2020 actually turned out to be a pretty decent year because they took full advantage of the beginning of that market burst in Q4 2020, and Q4, the fourth quarter of 2020 was a record year for them. And then 2021 was just absolutely gangbusters for these individuals. I think within our Texas organization, like 80% plus of our producers had record career-breaking years in 2021. And now halfway through 2022, they're on pace for an even better 2022. And because they built up so much momentum as a result of turning client mind share into market share, even though there's some headwinds ahead in the second half of 2022, they're on pace to actually outpace what they did in 2021. So, lastly, before I turn it back over to Max, just to put a bow on things, talk about the market burst. The worst thing about a market burst for some following a market disruption, it's realizing that you missed it, that you failed to make hay while the sun shines. And again, that's going to depend on your own litmus test of where you are. Are you the jogger? Are you the runner? Are you the rider? On the contrary, putting in the work required to hit a market burst just at the right time, that's a thing of beauty, and it's going to enable you to experience massive success in a short period of time and actually end up better off than if the market disruption, whatever that might be, never occurred. So last point, Max, and then I'm going to turn it back to you. Look, when market conditions are great, just about everyone can shine to an extent, even the joggers and walkers out there. But in disruptive times, the times that we're challenged, that's going to be your opportunity in your career to separate yourself from the pack and advance your careers. And when I mean advance your careers, I don't just mean monetarily. But I also mean in terms of your leadership and your personal and your professional development, because how you handle times of adversity, working alongside other people in your organization, you want to be that person, the people within your organization and your colleagues, people you might report to, you want to be the person that they want to be like in a foxhole with. And that's going to make you indispensable to an organization. And again, doing that requires finding the silver lining, seizing the opportunity. With that, Max, I know you had maybe a few questions from the audience, so I would love to fill those to the best of my abilities.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that message, Bruce. I really love the good philosophy that you brought up and really focusing on looking at those disruptions, not as the end of the world, but as an opportunity to grow. And I really appreciate you sharing those tangible examples, a story about Nick and a few other examples in there that were really fun to hear. So now, like you said, we do have a few questions that were submitted by our students that we'd like to ask. First being, how should we best position ourselves in the job market when graduating into a recession?
Well, first, I'll tell you what you shouldn't do. I graduated college in May of 2009. So fall of my senior year, that's when Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and it was the onset of the Great Recession. So what I did during that time, I just punted all together, and I went to law school so I could essentially avoid the Great Recession, but I wasn't passionate about it, and I ended up graduating, but I wish I would have jumped straight into what I do now and what I love. So that's what you don't do. Don't punt. Do something that you're passionate about, and go and attack the opportunity. I think once you're through the door somewhere, it's really I'll answer that kind of in reverse order. So once you're through the door, what is it that people want to see? What is it that employers and organizations want to see? A lot of the things I covered today, they're going to want someone that's resilient, and when they're confronted with a challenge, they're going to want someone that's going to view it as an opportunity versus a problem. So to back up and reverse engineer that, how do you, when you're trying to get in the door somewhere, and knowing that maybe in a recession there's going to be less spots available, how do you best position yourself to get through the door? Knowing that this is what clients want, people that are going to handle and overcome adversity in challenging times. I'd find your own personal anecdotes and stories of examples and accomplishments in the past where you faced adversity and you've overcome adversity, and make sure that whoever you're interviewing with understands that, is going to walk away and say, man, like, Max Kleiner, I want to hire that guy because he's a resilient individual.
That's great. I really appreciate that insight. And it's good things to know as we graduate, some of us getting closer than others. The next question we have is, what best practices can individuals have within their professions to prepare for times of crisis?
That's a great question, an interesting question. Well, the first thing you can do is to be fully prepared is make sure that you're indispensable to an organization, that you're that individual that the higher ups, the ones that make the decisions on who to hire and who to fire, that they look at you as someone that's resilient and someone that they want to be in the foxhole with. Because the harsh reality is, if you're in the workforce and you're part of an organization, big or small, if a recession hits that's going to impact that company financially, really hard decisions are going to have to be made. And good people are unfortunately going to be either let go or furloughed at the least. So going back to the book, I in the metaphor I keep touching on, you want to make sure that you're at least a runner, right? Because we know that the riders, they're the first to go, and potentially all the way up to the joggers. And so the best way to position yourself to at least survive the onset of what potentially could be initial cuts is to be that indispensable person. And as harsh as it might sound, be better than your peers. Be better than your peers, more dependable than your peers, and be indispensable. outside of that, if and when you're still with the organization and the recession hits, whether you're in a sales job or a W-2 job, like, doesn't matter. It goes back to a lot of the things that I'm talking about, or I've talked about previously, in terms of a lot of it's mental. So it's having that good mentality that we talked about. It's being resilient, looking through the lens of how this is an opportunity for you to separate yourself from your peers and your competitors potentially even more, and advance your careers, and being able to recognize the fact and seeing that silver lining that through tough times, you're going to be able to grow through it. One of my favorite sayings is, there's no room for growth in the comfort zone, right? So we only grow in times where we're uncomfortable. And certainly in times of market disruptions or recessions, that's the ultimate stress test.
Love that, Bruce. A question I'm thinking about right now for us in college still, what are some tangible ways that we can showcase resilience to recruiters and to the people that we're interviewing with for that entry level role?
That's a great question, and people might answer this differently, and it's probably going to depend on industry. I know you and your colleagues and everyone at Baylor is like super impressive, and you guys might not always have the hardest time finding jobs. It might be which job to pick. But to answer the question, like in my industry, which at the end of the day is a sales job, or for any job where there's going to be a sales component, where there's going to have to be prospecting, what we want to see is someone that not only is resilient, but also is persistent, not afraid to reach out. So, I'm between my offices in a given week, let's say I get 20 to 25 applications and resumes that hit my inbox each week. Sometimes I have time to filter through it. Other times the week gets busy and it might sit there for a little bit. The number one way to get to the top of the inbox, or to get in contact with me as a hiring person, is to, in addition to submitting the application, it's actually picking up the phone and calling me. And not just calling me once, like calling me multiple times, and being what I'd call like politely persistent. Because what you're demonstrating is that you're passionate, and you're really making a reflection on really how intense isn't the right word, but how persistent and resilient you can be at the job. Because the majority of jobs out there, as you're growing, there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, particularly in your first couple of years. And we want to see people and individuals, the type of people that I want to hire are the people that are persistent and so passionate and want to be a part of our organization and our family. And that's just not on the front end too. I think an important thing to understand is a lot of times within organizations, again, like people that are hiring, a lot of times they wear a lot of different hats, and they're busier at some times than others. And I think all too often, if an employer doesn't follow up like immediately after a meeting, or maybe an email goes unreturned, the student or the applicant sees that as, man, they must not be interested. But in reality, it could just be that they're busy. But the problem with that is more and more time elapses, there's a better and better chance that you're going to get lost in the shuffle. So it's just always staying on top of staying in front of, wherever it is you want to work. And then I'd also keep in mind, if you're not branding yourself, you're being branded. And so what I mean by that in the scheme of the interview process is, that's your opportunity to shape your brand and who you are. So what you want your brand to be, and I don't mean this to be disingenuous, you got to understand what the employer's looking for. And in understanding what the employer is looking for, that's what you want to brand yourself as. And if you're not being proactive in doing that, man, you're just leaving it up in the air for the employer or the hiring manager to brand you based on their own interpretations. The last thing I'll say, and especially in a sales role, I'm sure they train you guys to do this at Baylor in your interview process. Conditionally close or trial close like your employer. So at the end of the first meeting, hey, is there any reason based on our time together today that you wouldn't think that I'd be a great fit for your organization? So what we're doing in that moment, we're not asking that question to gauge the probability of whether or not we're going to get hired or not. What we're doing, we're trying to flush out the objections. And once we're able to flush out the objections, then we're potentially able to demonstrate and brand ourselves in the way that we need to be seen. But if you don't ask that question, for all you know, there's 3 or 4 things that the employer has reservations about. But if you don't flush it out, how are you going to be able to overcome it? So that, I always get excited when someone conditionally closes me in an interview process. I'll generally like stand up and like give them a high five.
And I love the idea of being politely persistent too. I've never heard that before, but it's a neat way of looking at it. Well, thanks, Bruce. And we really appreciate you sharing that with our audience today and your insight into how we can turn negative events in our careers and our life into positive outcomes. And students, we want to thank you for being with us as well today and want to direct you to the URL that's going to be on the screen right now to complete the survey in order to register your attendance. Thanks, Bruce.